We are in the New Granada, in the area contained between the river Arauca, the plains of Casanare, and north of the eastern mountain range. We are observing the route between Tame and Santa Fe. Next stage, Tame, Socha. The Liberation Army was finally constituted by a general staff whose chief was Brigadier General Carlos Sublet, and by two divisions: the vanguard, under the command of Francisco de Paula Santander, and the rear guard, commanded by Brigadier General José Antonio Anzoátegui. This one had integrated a rear guard general staff, which had as a chief the Granadian Lieutenant Colonel José María Córdoba. Bolivar's army, on its organizational structure, was formed by 2 infantry brigades and a cavalry unit. The first brigade was made by the battalions Rifles and Barcelona, and a cavalry company called Carabineros. The second brigade was formed by the battalions Bravos de Páez and the British Legion, with the cavalry squadrons 1st and 2nd de Llano Arriba. Once the army was structured, they began to move on the 17th of June, marching through the plains in parallel to the eastern Andes mountain range. The road to Morcote liaised the villages of Lope, Trapiche del Toche, Brito, Pore, and Nunchia. The crossing of the big streams of water in the plains was extremely difficult and dangerous. But it was even worse marching the Andes foothill due to the torrent of rivers and streams down the mountains, which were not easy to cross by foot nor swimming. From June the 22nd, the bulk of the advancing army was marching one day behind the vanguard through rugged terrain. But the main obstacle for the military operation was the livestock, which was in pretty bad conditions and was very hard to lead through this difficult terrain. Morcote the Odyssey of the Llanos was finished, and now it was starting a new one, even harder, with completely opposed characteristics, for which only soldiers coming from the mountains were prepared. The llaneros from the plains, instead, were getting out from their natural habitat to enter into the unknown highlands, from which most of them never had heard of before. On the 27th of June, it took place the first contact against the royalists in the whole campaign, when 310 men under the command of the mayor Juan Figueroa, second commander of the Primero del Rey battalion, they were dislodged from their position at the fort of Paya. thanks to a skillful enveloping movement in which the Grenadine forces demonstrated their excellent ability for the combat. This action of war has been compared sometimes with the famous Battle of Thermopylae, due to its similarities with this battle. Also known as el Trincherón de Paya. Having easily removed the first military obstacle, this action proved the success of choosing an invasion route that, even being very painful, presented less resistance from the enemy and left open their access to the highlands. Due to the serious difficulties suffered by the Venezuelan troops, coming on their majority from the warm regions around the rivers Orinoco and Apure, from the Caribbean coasts and islands, and by the British soldiers, not accustomed to the hardships of the tropical climate, El Libertador Bolivar was forced to call a junta of commanders, meeting on June the 29th, in order to analyze how convenient was to carry on with the campaign. In their final decision, it was crucial the influence of generals Santander and Anzoátegui, who gave a favorable opinion to resuming the military operations. So, Bolivar agreed to continue the campaign. Equally, the monk Fray Ignacio Mariño, as general chaplain of the army, agreed with the opinions of Santander and Anzoátegui. On the 30th of June, Bolivar made a brilliant proclaim to the Grenadians. That was handed to the Mayor Joaquín París in order to be profusely distributed on all the towns and villages of Boyacá. But the most challenging test was still to come. Since the mountain covered in clouds hid the visions of the pass of the Páramo de Pisba, who defiantly stood in front of the eyes of the warlike llaneros. July the 1st. The ascent to the moorlands of the Páramo de Pisba, also called Páramo de Socotá, began. They had ahead 6 days going uphill, and then descending the moors until the 5th of June and the 6th. The challenges were the ridges, the extreme cold, and finding little more than lichen and moss to feed their horses and oxen. Some llaneros deserted, some perished. Above 4,000 meters, in a path full of crosses from anonymous graves, there were scattered skulls from men and animals alike, who paid the ultimate price for the challenge of crossing the mountains. On July the 3rd, in the middle of the ascent, on the way to reaching the top of the mountain, the wife of one of the soldiers went into labor, and then the miracle happened. On the growing grass, she gave birth to a boy who was wrapped in dirty shirts. 3 days after, would arrive to Socha. The soldiers, upon seeing behind them the high ridges of the covered in cloud mountains, made a vow of victory or death, rather than even thinking about retreating, since they feared the Andes more than the enemy, no matter how formidable he may be. The Catholic priest of Socha, Juan Thomas Romero, and the town mayor, José Ignacio Sarmiento, knowing about the arrival of the army from the moorlands, and the precarious conditions in which the soldiers were, called for a big gathering on Sunday, July the 4th. all the parishioners met at the church, where the clergyman explained to the humble folks, both men and women, about the many deprivations suffered by the soldiers. And the urgent necessity of bringing them support. He resorted to ask the locals for clothing and blankets to cover their nudity, spadrilles, scarves, woolen ruanas, and hats. The civilians only left on their bodies the garments required to just get out from the temple on a decorous way. A 13-year-old girl, Matilde Anaray, was the first taking off her clothes to donate them to the army, so that 18 loads of clothing to be distributed along the troops were heading to the moorlands, conducted by robust peasants anxious to hand over their first donation. The 1st Lancers Regiment of the division focused in helping the British on the rear guard. The same was made with the division led by Anzoátegui, in whose head fought El Libertador. The lack of training of the troops for this kind of operations, and the problems derived from an inappropriate preparation for the long march, made that this division suffer about 40 fatalities during the crossing, and that they couldn't cross the moors in a single day, as it was necessary under these circumstances, having to stay on that solitude during the night of the 5th to the 6th of July, subject to the hardships of a rough nature, which severely hit those bodies, which were numb because of the cold. The first troops on this group arrived to Socha on the afternoon of July the 6th, losing many men, the few remaining horses, and having to abandon most of their baggage. The manifesto, previously made and divulged as much by General Santander as by Bolivar himself, was distributed in Socha, Socotá, Tasco, Gámeza, Sátiva, Beteitiba, and Corrales, raising the patriotic spirit of the people, who were just waiting for the arrival of the army in order to join and participate in the feat. Never an entire population had waited so impatiently to his liberators in order to collaborate by all their possible meanings in the struggle for their freedom.